My father was a rather passive figure. The dominant person in the family was my mother. Whatever happened was what she planned and decided and made to work. My father would not have left Vienna. And there are as many examples as you can think of men who felt that way and often caused the family to stay and eventually to perish. He said, I'm not leaving. This isn't going to last, and the Nazi invasion has to be something that we live through. My mother, from the beginning of that time, said, I've got to get that kid out.
She was a pragmatist. She saw. She just didn't hide behind what was happening. You think?
She didn't anticipate it. There are people who anticipated it and knew enough about what was going in the world. That's not what happened to her. But as soon as she saw the Nazi flags in the street, the people parading, shouting, slogans, she said, we've got to get out of here. And she totally devoted herself to getting me out. And when the time came, she left with me. My father didn't come. And as a result, he was picked up by the police a short time later, sent to a concentration camp. And there are 500,000 people who died in that concentration camp. And the fact that he survived even there is also partly my mother's doing, because she found somebody who paid for a ticket away to the one place that we knew of where you didn't have to have a visa, and that was Shanghai. And there's a community of refugees that did that and stayed in Shanghai, sometimes for long times. Yeah. My father had a ticket, and he got there. No, I'm sorry, he got out, I should say, and eventually made his way to England. He never went and never used the ticket, but it made it possible for him to get out. And eventually, I remember the time when he arrived in Vancouver, when I was there by myself, and I went to the ship to pick him up. And again, the question has been by some people, was that an emotional time? It was 3 years after we had seen each other last. I think not. He was a somewhat emotional person, and he broke down and cried easily, but that wasn't me. In fact, when he came, I was alone, and I felt that I had to take care of him. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know much English, and I had been there by that time. I had been to school. I had been to high school. I had just graduated from high school, and I was ready to take on that responsibility, and that worked fairly well. That's the time when a refugee committee paid for a room where we stayed, and they paid the rent, but I paid for everything else out of earnings during that year when I had several jobs. Again, just a couple of years after I'd ever heard my first word of English. But that worked pretty well. You talk about how passive he was. We were together and we talked, all the time. But I didn't really learn much about him.
Yeah, I interrupt. It sounds like he was like an uncle or a cousin. That's the feeling I got from the book, not a father.
Uh-huh. I think that's a correct observation. We lived side by side, but he never opened up about his experiences.
The internment camps, everything. Right?
In the camps, as soon as he arrived in England, he was interned as an enemy alien. And he also didn't talk about his early life. He was born in Hungary, not very far from Vienna. This was all a part of Middle Europe that was where countries were very close to each other. But I never learned anything about his family. I knew his mother slightly, but all the time I knew her, she was in bed. And I knew one of his sisters, he was one of 5. But I never really learned about them, or his life with them, or even what happened to them later.